So what is all of this hysteria? Well, we've been doing hysteria for about, I guess 40, 50 years. Back in the 70s, we were all hysterical that the planet was freezing. And by the time we get to the mid-90s, Al Gore and company are all hysterical that the planet is going to boil. Didn't happen. Remember those predictions? Cities underwater, coastal flooding. We're going to, land is going to disappear, islands in the Pacific sinking. None of that happened. Why? Because hysteria wasn't science. Let me clue you in on a couple of little key things to figure out when you hear talking about climate science, whether it's science or it's politics or hysteria. Scientists, by nature, by definition, are skeptics. They're skeptical. That's how we make breakthroughs. We don't take status quo. Scientists will say, does gravity really work that way? Isaac Newton, did he really define all the proper laws, or do they really work a little different way? So they're skeptical. But politicians, that's a different breed. Most of them are attorneys. They're looking for consensus. Consensus equals politics. It's as simple as that. So when you hear 97% of all scientists agree that global warming is real, or climate change is real, if you actually go back and check on that, John cooked the books, cooked the data, cooked the survey, and you can find that all over the internet. It was dishonest reporting in the beginning. So that's part of where all your hysteria comes from. How about some more hysteria? Remember Neil deGrasse Tyson? I'm often asked whether I believe in global warming. I now just reply with the question, do you believe in gravity? Is that a scientific statement or is that a political statement? Politics, plain and simple. How about the politician Barack Obama? In 2015, no challenge poses a greater threat to the future of generations than climate change. Is he a scientist? No, he's a politician. So how is it that politicians do this stuff? Why do they do this stuff? Because politicians want to control you through government mandates, laws, regulations, and outright fear. That's the whole point. They try to use science as a way to control the populations by making you afraid of the air you breathe. That is unbelievable. So why don't they ever come up with any real good science on climate? Well, actually, a lot of scientists really do, but it's complicated, very complicated. Take a look at this. There are over 30 parameters that loop into each other, feedback loops they call them. The amount of sunlight reflected by clouds, the amount of moisture held in the air that aren't even clouds, the amount of CO2 that's absorbed in the oceans, and the way the oceans transfer temperatures around, the way the oceans kind of get warmer, get slightly cooler, ice, and so on and so forth. It's that complicated. So what does the United Nations Panel on Climate Control, the IPCC, do? They focus on one small part of that whole system. And then they focus on 3.6% of that subset. And then they identify one gas in that 3.6%, which is carbon dioxide. And then they turn around and say, ooh, the evils of carbon dioxide. Oh, it's a greenhouse gas. Yeah, it's a greenhouse gas. But so is water vapor. So are clouds. We have no way of quantifying about the water vapor and the clouds in the air and how solar radiation affects that. Oh, which brings up another thing. If you want to get people to be afraid of the climate, you have to eliminate the possibility that the sun has anything to do with climate. I got trolled that way one day on one of those social networks. This troll comes up and says, it's a proven fact, the sun has nothing to do with climate. Oh yeah? Does it get cooler at night? Yeah. Is it a little warmer under an overcast sky in the winter? Yeah. Is it hotter when the sun is out, there's no clouds? Yeah. I think you have to have an IQ below 60 to be an internet troll sometimes. So what is real science? Well, they're going to scare you with the North Pole is melting. And then they're going to scare you with, no, the South Pole is melting. But scientists who actually follow this stuff say the net effect is zero. When we lose ice at the North Pole, we gain ice at the South Pole. When we lose ice at the South Pole, we gain it at the North Pole. Net effect? Nothing. Net effect of temperature on the Earth over a period of time, even a number of decades? Nearly nothing. So where do we get the hysteria? Well, a screw up by the United Nations, International Panel for Climate Change. They came up with a graph based on a computer model that not only failed to predict the future, it couldn't even predict the past. Now, how bad do you have to get when you can't even predict the past? But politicians latched onto this, Al Gore especially, and he made a big deal out of it. Yeah. You can't take what's going on in the climate in such tiny little increments as 5 years, 10 years, and you can't grab something from 3 million years ago and apply it to today, and they do that kind of stuff if they're political science. So why is it that so many scientists seem to agree with the climate change narrative? Well, the truth is the government hands out the big research grants, and they make you confess that you believe in climate change and that man causes it and it's dangerous just to get the grant. You know how much science you can settle that way? You bet you believe it. But there's a few more things that deal with this, a few more parameters that are even worse. Let's go with Christiana Figueres. She worked on the UN panel, and she has this to say: this is probably the most difficult task we've ever given ourselves, which is to intentionally transform the economic development model for the first time in human history. Wait a minute. Doesn't this have something to do with the environment and protecting the environment? She's talking about climate, and she's on this IPCC panel. How about another character, Ottoman Endenhofer? He also was on this panel, and he has this to say, and this is like a couple years old: climate change policy has almost nothing to do anymore with environmental protection, says the German economist. The next World Climate Summit in Cancun, which has already passed, is actually an economic summit, during which time the distribution of the world's resources will be negotiated. So what are they actually doing? Well, both of these persons happen to be socialists. One of them's a communist. What they're really trying to do is to punish the industrialized nations, which they think are destroying the entire global climate, and they want to send the means of production of their wealth off to countries that have less wealth. That's basically how China gets a lot of our industry. Never mind the fact that they also don't pay their people 1/10 of what we pay ours. So this whole thing comes together as an economic reshuffle. So what's all the hysteria about? It's an economic reshuffle. That's all it is. That's why governments want you to be afraid of the air you breathe. Nonsense. Take a deep breath and live free.